The unseen authority. The energy inside Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was palpable, a mix of hurried footsteps, rolling suitcases, and the distant murmur of flight announcements. The air carried the scent of roasted coffee from the countless kiosks dotting the terminal, and clusters of travelers moved with a sense of purpose, some eager, some exhausted, all focused on reaching their destinations. Among them walked Agent Nia Caldwell, clad in dark jeans, a simple hoodie, and running shoes, an outfit that allowed her to blend seamlessly into the sea of passengers. Her locks, tied neatly into a bun, framed her sharp cheekbones and keen brown eyes, which casually swept the area. She looked like an ordinary traveler, perhaps a graduate student or a young professional on a business trip. But Nia was anything but ordinary. She was an undercover FBI agent, returning from a covert operation that had nearly cost her life. The past 2 years had been grueling. Working deep undercover, Nia had infiltrated an underground cybercrime syndicate responsible for laundering millions through digital currencies and fraudulent offshore accounts. She had spent months earning the trust of criminals who would kill without hesitation if they ever suspected her true identity. Now, the mission was over. The sting had gone down flawlessly, the arrests had been made, and she was on her way back to Washington, D.C. for debriefing. But despite the mission's success, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still unresolved. She adjusted the strap of her small duffel bag, shifting her weight as she approached the security checkpoint. Unlike most travelers, she carried no suitcase, just her trusted laptop and essential documents. Years of field work had taught her the value of traveling light. A sharp buzz from her phone made her glance down. A text from her superior at the FBI headquarters flashed across the screen. "Well done, Caldwell. Report directly to the Bureau when you land. Time-sensitive intel incoming." Nia exhaled. No rest for the weary. She deleted the message immediately, ensuring no trace of it remained on her phone. The digital world had eyes everywhere, and she wasn't taking any chances, not after spending 2 years in the lion's den of cybercriminals. As she neared the checkpoint, she noticed the lines moving efficiently. TSA agents worked with a mechanical rhythm, directing passengers through body scanners and checking IDs. For a moment, everything seemed routine, until she felt it. That distinct sensation of being watched. She knew it well, the weight of someone's gaze pressing against her like a physical touch. Her instincts sharpened instantly, muscles coiling like a spring as she scanned the area subtly. Then she saw him, Officer Raymond Travis. A stocky, middle-aged airport police officer stood near a security post, his uniform crisp but his posture rigid. His sharp blue eyes locked onto Nia with unmistakable scrutiny. Even from a distance, she could read him like an open book. His stance wasn't neutral. He wasn't just scanning the crowd. He had picked her, and he didn't look like he was planning to let her pass easily. Nia fought the urge to sigh. Here we go. She had encountered men like him before, officers who wore their badges like a shield against accountability, who thrived on the power to disrupt people's lives simply because they could. She had spent her entire career ensuring that such abuses were exposed and dismantled. And yet here she was. Travis didn't move immediately, but his eyes never left her. She could tell he was debating his approach, probably crafting an excuse to single her out. Profiling. The oldest trick in the book. With practiced ease, Nia adjusted her expression to one of quiet indifference. She refused to give him the satisfaction of rattling her. She stepped into the security line, pulling out her boarding pass and ID. The TSA agent checking documents, a young black woman with weary eyes, barely glanced at her before weaving her through. But as Nia moved toward the scanner, a voice cut through the crowd. "Ma'am, step aside." The words were calm, but the command in them was unmistakable. Nia turned slowly, meeting Officer Travis's piercing gaze. Passengers around her hesitated, some pausing mid-step, instinctively sensing tension. Travelers always recognized when an authority figure was about to flex power that wasn't necessary. She kept her tone neutral. Is there a problem, officer? Travis stepped closer, his hand resting on the belt near his holster. Random screening. Nia arched a brow. Right. Her training kicked in immediately. She knew the law. Airport security could conduct additional screenings if a passenger fit a risk profile. But local airport police, they weren't TSA. They had no automatic right to search passengers unless there was probable cause. What's the reason for the screening? She asked, keeping her voice even but firm. I just cleared ID verification. Travis's eyes flicked to her bag. What's in there? Nia resisted the urge to smirk. Personal belongings. I'm happy to let TSA do their job if they need to check. Travis didn't like that. She saw the flicker of annoyance in his expression. A power struggle. She could practically hear his thoughts. He wasn't used to people, especially a black woman, questioning his authority. You traveling alone? He asked. Yes, she said simply. Travis nodded as if confirming a suspicion. Step out of the line. By now, passengers were openly staring. Some avoided eye contact, quickly shuffling forward, unwilling to get involved. Others hesitated, watching with silent unease. Nia felt the weight of history pressing down on this moment. This wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been pulled aside for a random screening, every black traveler who had been scrutinized simply for existing in a public space. She could end this in 2 seconds. All she had to do was flash her FBI credentials. The moment Travis saw that badge, he'd back off so fast he might trip over himself. But that wasn't the play. She wasn't just an agent. She was still undercover. No one in this airport, especially not Travis, could know who she really was. So instead, she took a deep breath and did the one thing he didn't expect. She smiled. Of course, officer, she said, stepping out of line. Lead the way. If Travis thought he was about to intimidate her, he was in for a rude awakening. This was just the beginning, and he had no idea who he had just picked a fight with. The price of power. The sterile white walls of the security checkpoint reflected the fluorescent lighting overhead, casting a sharp contrast between the lively energy of the airport and the growing tension in the small, isolated room where Nia now stood. Officer Travis had led her away from the main TSA screening area, past a few glass-walled offices, and into a side corridor labeled Additional Screening. Airport security. It was a classic intimidation tactic. Remove the person from the public eye, strip them of their audience, and make them feel vulnerable. But if Travis thought isolating her would shake her confidence, he had picked the wrong target. Nia leaned casually against the wall, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. The tiny room was empty except for a metal table, a few plastic chairs, and a row of lockers against the far wall. A large two-way mirror loomed on one side, a favorite tool of law enforcement to observe without being seen. Travis closed the door behind him, exhaling as he adjusted his belt. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if relishing his perceived power over her. Let's try this again, he said, pulling out a small notepad. Full name? Nia raised a brow. I already gave you my ID. Travis smirked, tapping the notepad with his pen. I like to hear people say it out loud. Nia let a beat of silence stretch between them before answering. Nia Caldwell. Where are you traveling from? Atlanta. Where to? D.C. What for? Nia exhaled, letting just a trace of annoyance slip into her voice. Business. Travis tilted his head, studying her. His eyes flickered to her duffel bag resting on the table. What kind of business? Legal consulting. He chuckled, shaking his head. Legal consulting. You expect me to believe that? Nia's lips curled in amusement. Was this really his strategy? Push until she lost her cool. Try to bait her into a reaction that justified his harassment. You think I'm lying? She asked, keeping her voice light. Travis leaned forward slightly, resting both hands on the table. I think you look suspicious. I think you're a little too calm for someone being questioned by security. Nia let out a small laugh. Is that your metric for guilt? Being calm? Travis's smirk faltered. He didn't like her confidence. She had seen this before, the thin-skinned authority figure who mistook compliance for submission and confidence for defiance. Travis turned, stepping toward her duffel bag. He ran a hand along the zipper, glancing at her. You mind if I take a look? Nia tilted her head slightly. Here was the moment. If she refused, he'd use it as an excuse to escalate. If she agreed, she was giving him exactly what he wanted. The power to invade her space, to search her personal belongings without justification. She chose a third option. If I refuse, do I still get to board my flight? She asked, folding her arms. Travis paused, surprised by her question. His eyes narrowed slightly. That depends. On what? He exhaled, clearly growing frustrated that she wasn't behaving the way he expected. Ma'am, you need to cooperate. Nia smiled. She had him. Then I'll cooperate, but I'd like a supervisor present, she said smoothly. Travis's jaw tightened. She saw the flash of irritation in his eyes. He hadn't expected her to know her rights. A request for a supervisor put him in a bind. If he refused, she could later claim he denied her due process. If he agreed, it put another set of eyes on the situation. Eyes that might not back his biased approach. For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, without a word, he pulled his radio from his belt. Dispatch, this is Officer Travis. I need a supervisor at Secondary Screening Room 3. A crackle of static. Then a female voice responded. Copy that. Supervisor Adams is en route. Travis clipped the radio back onto his belt, his nostrils flaring slightly as he turned back to her. You could have made this easier on yourself. Nia's expression didn't waver, and you could have followed protocol. His eye twitched slightly, but before he could respond, the door swung open. Supervisor Adams entered, a tall black woman in a Navy airport security uniform, her expression neutral but firm. Her badge identified her as Chief Supervisor. Her sharp eyes took in the scene immediately, landing on Travis first. What's going on here? Adams asked, her tone even. Travis straightened slightly. Just conducting a secondary screening, Mom. Adams shifted her gaze to Nia. Did TSA refer you for additional screening? No, Mom, Nia said smoothly. Officer Travis pulled me aside on his own. Adams arched a brow and turned back to Travis. For what reason? Travis hesitated for half a second before answering. Suspicious behavior. Adams folded her arms. Explain. She's traveling alone, carrying minimal luggage, and was acting evasive when I asked her about her business. Adams studied Nia again, taking in her composed demeanor. Nia could see the calculations behind her gaze, the careful assessment of whether Travis was overstepping. Then Adams spoke. Did she clear TSA? Yes, but. Did TSA flag her? No, but. Adams cut him off with a raised hand. Then she's free to go. Travis stiffened. Supervisor, I think she needs further screening. No, Adams said sharply. I think you're overstepping. Unless you have probable cause, this stops here. The finality in her tone left no room for argument. Travis clenched his jaw, clearly furious. But he had no choice. He took a step back, his fists clenching at his sides. Adams turned to Nia, offering a professional nod. You're free to go, ma'am. Apologies for the inconvenience. Nia inclined her head. I appreciate it, Supervisor. Travis muttered something under his breath, but Nia ignored him as she grabbed her duffel bag and slung it over her shoulder. She walked out of the room without looking back. But she knew this wasn't over. As she re-entered the bustling terminal, merging back into the throng of travelers, she stole a quick glance over her shoulder. Officer Travis stood just outside the security room, watching her leave with cold, unrelenting eyes. A shiver ran down her spine, not from fear, but from recognition. She had spent 2 years undercover among criminals. She knew the look of a man who wasn't done yet. And Travis wasn't done. The hunter and the prey. The moment Nia stepped back into the bustling concourse of the airport, she felt his eyes on her. She kept her pace steady, forcing herself not to look back. If she had learned anything from years of undercover work, it was that the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one who came at you with rage. It was the one who watched you in silence, planning. Travis wasn't the type to let go easily. She had seen it in his posture, in the clenched fists he thought she hadn't noticed. Men like him weren't used to losing, especially not to women, and definitely not to black women who didn't cower under their authority. Her instinct screamed, this wasn't over. But she wasn't a rookie. She wasn't some scared civilian who would go home and complain about an unfair airport experience on social media, hoping for change. She was the change. With that thought steadying her nerves, she made her way toward the nearest cafe, weaving through clusters of travelers dragging luggage and clutching their coffee cups like lifelines. She needed a moment to collect herself, assess the situation, and most importantly, decide her next move. She wasn't just going to let this go. Not because she was angry, though she was. Not because she had something to prove, though she did. She was going to see this through because Travis was a problem. And Nia Caldwell handled problems. A shadow in a crowd. The cafe was busy, filled with the chatter of travelers. Nia found a seat near the window and positioned herself where she could see the entrance and most of the floor without appearing too obvious. She pulled out her phone and checked her messages. Nothing urgent. Good. She took a sip of her overpriced coffee, letting her mind replay the last 30 minutes. Travis, his insistence, his barely contained frustration when his authority was questioned. The way he had chosen her, out of all the people in that airport, to flex his power on. Why her? She had no checked baggage. She had already cleared TSA. She had done absolutely nothing to stand out, except for existing in a space where he didn't think she belonged. And now, she had his attention. A feeling settled deep in her gut. Not fear. A warning. She glanced up casually, scanning the crowds outside the cafe. It only took a second for her eyes to land on him. Travis, standing near a pillar, pretending to look at his phone. Following her. Nia took a slow sip of coffee, pretending not to notice. He wasn't watching her directly, but she recognized the tactic. Predators never looked at their prey straight on. They used their peripheral vision, studied reflections in glass surfaces, and moved when the target moved. She wasn't just a random security stop anymore. She was now a loose end in his mind, and that was dangerous. The call. She tapped her phone screen and swiped to her secure messaging app. She typed out a quick text. To Reese. Airport cop flagged me. Unnecessary detainment. Now tailing me. Name. Raymond Travis. Run him. Let me know what turns up. She didn't have to wait long. Her phone vibrated 5 minutes later. FRO. Reese. Not good. Ex-NYPD. Multiple civilian complaints. Use of excessive force. Racial profiling. Got pushed out of his precinct after an incident 5 years ago. Internal affairs couldn't nail him, but he's dirty. Nia sighed. Of course he was. She quickly typed back. To Reese. He's watching me now. Thinks I'm a problem. I want to know exactly how big of a problem he is. Dig deeper. A pause. Then, FRO. Reese. You need me to extract you. That made Nia smirk. To Reese. Not yet, but keep your phone close. She slipped her phone into her pocket and took another sip of coffee, considering her options. She had 2 choices. She could leave the airport immediately, take an Uber instead of waiting for her flight, disappear before Travis had the chance to escalate things further. She could stay, see what he did next, see just how far he was willing to take this game he thought he was playing. A small part of her knew she should leave. She wasn't here for a mission. She wasn't here to investigate Travis. She had bigger things to handle in D.C. But another part of her, the part that had spent years infiltrating criminal organizations, the part that never let injustice slide, couldn't walk away. Because if she had been targeted today, then how many others had been before her? And how many would come after? Decision made. She was staying. And she was about to find out exactly what kind of man Raymond Travis really was. Setting the trap. Nia stood, stretching slightly as if she were just another tired traveler waiting for her flight. She walked toward the nearest escalator, heading toward her gate at the far end of the terminal. She made sure Travis saw her go. Sure enough, as soon as she stepped onto the moving walkway, she spotted him again. He was following her, casually, subtly, but definitely following. Good. She led him toward a quieter part of the terminal, where fewer passengers roamed. The closer she got to her gate, the thinner the crowd became. She needed room to maneuver. She slowed her pace, pretending to check her phone. Then, with the ease of someone who had spent years catching people who thought they were the hunters, she pivoted. And suddenly, she was behind him. Travis hadn't expected that. She saw the moment he realized he had lost sight of her. He turned his head sharply, scanning, confused. Then, before he could react, she stepped up behind him. "Lose something, officer." Travis stiffened. His head snapped around, his blue eyes wide with surprise. For the first time that day, he was the one caught off guard. "And Nia Caldwell." She smiled. The predator cornered. For the first time, Officer Raymond Travis looked caught. Nia had seen the look before, the moment a predator realized they weren't the one in control anymore. His blue eyes flickered with surprise, a crack in his carefully constructed facade. But it was brief. Almost immediately, he masked it with the same smug arrogance he had displayed at security. Men like him always doubled down when they felt threatened. His mistake. "You lost, Miss Caldwell?" he asked, his voice smooth but laced with irritation. Nia smiled, tilting her head slightly. "I could ask you the same thing, officer. You've been tailing me for the past 15 minutes. If I didn't know any better, I'd think you were lost." Travis let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "I'm airport security. Keeping an eye on passengers is part of my job." Nia held his gaze, letting a slow silence settle between them. "And yet, somehow, I'm the only passenger who's gotten your attention today." Travis's smirk faltered. She watched his hands, the way his fingers flexed near his belt, a subconscious tell that she had hit a nerve. He wasn't used to people calling him out. He especially wasn't used to women like her calling him out. She took a step closer, lowering her voice just enough to make it personal. "You're used to picking the right kind of people, aren't you?" she said softly. "The ones who don't fight back. The ones who let you have your little power trip and walk away shaking, hoping they never cross your path again." His jaw tightened. She smiled. "But you miscalculated today." Travis exhaled through his nose, his frustration barely contained. "You think you're special," he muttered, stepping forward slightly. His height advantage was obvious now, his stance trying to intimidate. Nia didn't flinch. Didn't move. Didn't blink. "I don't think," she murmured. "I know." Another silence. The airport noise droned in the background. The distant intercom, the hum of rolling suitcases, the chatter of passing travelers. For a moment, it was just them. Then, he stepped back. She had won, and he hated it. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Caldwell," he muttered, turning on his heel and walking away. Nia watched him go, her muscles still wired with adrenaline. She had expected him to take the bait, to escalate, to push. But instead, he walked away. That meant one of two things. Either she had scared him just enough to make him back off, or he was planning something worse, a friend in the right places. Nia didn't waste time. She took a detour toward the nearest airport lounge and pulled out her phone. Reese needed an update. "Toe, Reese. We have a bigger problem than we thought." I confronted him. He backed off too easily. That's not a good sign. FRO. Reese. Understood. I'll dig deeper. Do you need a shadow? Translation. Do you need an FBI tail on you? Nia considered it. Normally, she would refuse. She didn't like the idea of anyone having to watch her back. She was trained for this. She could handle herself. But something about Travis's sudden retreat nagged at her. She texted back. To. Reese. Not yet. But I want every report on this guy. NYPD history, complaints, connections. There's something here, and I want to know what it is. She sent the message, then exhaled, rubbing her temples. This was supposed to be a routine flight home. Now it was turning into an investigation. A bad feeling. Her flight to D.C. wasn't boarding for another hour. She used the time wisely. First, she checked her surroundings. Travis was nowhere in sight. That didn't mean he was gone. It just meant he wasn't being obvious about it anymore. Then, she pulled up her phone's secure VPN and accessed a remote database, scanning for any open records related to Raymond Travis. The NYPD files were still sealed, but she found enough civilian complaints to paint a very clear picture. Excessive force, racial profiling, harassment of minority passengers at JFK. The same pattern, the same behavior. Only this time, he had picked the wrong target. She saved the documents and forwarded them to Reese with one final note. To. Reese, this isn't just an airport cop with a grudge. This is a pattern, and I want to know why he still has a badge. She hit send. Then, for the first time since stepping into this airport, she allowed herself to relax. Just a little. Just enough to let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was over. She was wrong. A final confrontation. The flight announcement crackled overhead. Passengers on Flight 238 to Washington, D.C., please proceed to Gate 27 for boarding. Nia gathered her bag, stretched, and made her way toward the gate. The crowd had thinned by now, and the atmosphere was calmer than before. Then she felt it again. That unmistakable weight of someone watching. Her senses went sharp. She scanned the area, her gaze sweeping left to right. There, a figure near the far wall, standing near an empty gate. Travis. He was waiting. Nia exhaled slowly, gripping the strap of her bag. What's your play, Travis? As if answering her unspoken question. Travis pulled out his phone. Nia's own phone buzzed. She glanced down. Unknown number. Her stomach turned. She hesitated, then swiped to answer. Caldwell. Travis's voice came through, quiet and sharp. You don't know when to quit, do you? Nia's fingers clenched around her phone. I was just thinking the same thing about you. A low chuckle. See, here's the problem, Miss Caldwell, Travis said. You think you're untouchable. You think because you know a few legal terms and can call for a supervisor that you've won. His voice dropped. But you don't know me. A chill ran down her spine. She kept her tone level. I know exactly what you are, Travis, and I know how this ends for you. Silence. Then, his final warning. Enjoy your flight, he said, because one day, Caldwell, you'll walk through an airport just like this one, and there won't be a supervisor to save you. The line went dead. Nia lowered the phone, her heartbeat steady, but her mind racing. Travis was making a threat, a real one, and that meant he was scared, which meant she was getting too close to something he didn't want found. She took a breath. Fine. If he wanted a war, she would give him one. Nia turned, heading straight for the gate. This wasn't over. Not even close. The cost of truth. 1. The flight that wasn't. The moment Nia stepped onto the jet bridge, she felt it. That weight. That presence. The tension that had been clinging to her all day hadn't left her behind at the gate. It had followed her right onto this plane. She walked down the narrow aisle, her mind running through the last conversation she'd had with Officer Travis. Enjoy your flight, because one day, Caldwell, you'll walk through an airport just like this one. And there won't be a supervisor to save you. A threat. Not subtle. Not vague. A promise. Travis wasn't just a bad cop. He was a bad cop with something to hide. And now that Nia had put herself in his crosshairs, she had to figure out exactly how deep the corruption ran. She slid into her seat -14A, window side, tucked her bag under the seat in front of her, clipped the seatbelt. But she wasn't relaxed, not even close. Something was wrong. She could feel it. The plane was nearly full, passengers stowing bags, murmuring, tapping on their phones. Flight attendants moved efficiently, checking seatbelts, directing travelers. But the energy was off. She didn't know what yet, but she trusted her instincts. A minute later, the answer came. A sudden, sharp sound, the crackle of the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, we are being asked to deplane at this time. Please remain seated until the flight crew provides further instructions." A ripple of confusion. Passengers looked up, groaning. "What the hell now?" A businessman grumbled, stuffing his laptop back into his briefcase. Nia's fingers tightened on her armrest. This wasn't random. This was planned. She glanced toward the front of the plane, and that's when she saw them. 2 airport police officers, walking directly toward her row. No, not just airport police. One of them was Travis. Her pulse slowed, calculated, as her mind raced through possibilities. What was his angle? Why wasn't he done? The plane wasn't going anywhere now, which meant neither was she. This was a setup. 2. The trap snapped shut. She remained seated as Travis stopped beside her row, his presence heavy, his smirk barely concealed. "Miss Caldwell," he said, voice even, but there was something smug lurking beneath it. "I'm going to need you to come with us." A few passengers visibly stiffened. Others leaned slightly away, trying to seem uninvolved. Nia stayed still. "Am I under arrest, officer?" Travis didn't blink. "We just have a few questions." "Then you can ask them right here," she replied smoothly, not moving an inch. Silence stretched. A standoff. One of the other officers shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't standard protocol, and they all knew it. But Travis wasn't playing by rules. He was playing by ego. "This isn't a request," he said finally, voice colder. Nia exhaled slowly. She had 2 choices. Resist. Demand legal justification. Call attention to the blatant abuse of authority. Make a scene in front of passengers recording on their phones. Go. Play along. See exactly what game Travis was trying to play. She chose the second option. Without a word, she unclipped her seatbelt and stood. She slung her bag over one shoulder and, with complete composure, followed the 2 officers off the plane. She didn't look back. Didn't have to, because she already knew what was coming. 3. Welcome to the cage. The interrogation room was just a repurposed security office. Dimly lit. Small. No windows. A metal table and 2 chairs. Classic setup. Travis leaned against the door, arms crossed, looking pleased with himself. Nia sat calmly, back straight. She watched him carefully, measuring his next move. "You know Caldwell," he began, his tone casual, like they were old friends. "I did a little digging." Nia didn't respond. She let the silence do the work. Travis smirked. "You're an interesting one. No real online footprint. No family photos, no social media. You travel alone. You don't fit the profile of a legal consultant." She said nothing. He leaned in slightly. "So tell me, who exactly are you?" Nia tilted her head slightly, her eyes steady. "That's funny, Officer Travis. I was just about to ask you the same thing." The smile flickered on his face, just for a second. Then it was gone. "I don't think you understand how this works," he murmured. "I'm the one asking the questions." Nia exhaled slowly, then leaned forward just enough to meet his gaze. Then let's play. You've been a cop for a while, haven't you, Travis? She asked, voice smooth. He frowned slightly, caught off guard. What does that have to do with anything? You've been at JFK for 5 years, she continued. Before that, NYPD. Before that, what was it? Vice? Organized crime unit. Travis's eyes darkened. There. That reaction was what she was looking for. She kept going. I did some digging, too. She let the words sink in, watching his pulse jump slightly at his throat. You've got a history, officer, a lot of complaints, a lot of misunderstandings. Yet somehow, you're still here. Silence. Then he laughed. A short, bitter sound. You think you know me? Nia smiled, slow and deliberate. I know your type. His smirk vanished. You think you're better than everyone else. You think your badge is a license to do whatever you want, to whomever you want. You prey on people who don't push back, who don't fight. You get off on control. She tilted her head. But what happens when you lose it? Travis's hand twitched near his belt. For a split second, his mask cracked. That was all Nia needed. He wasn't just a bad cop. He was scared. Of her. Of what she knew. Of what she could do to him. And now, she had proof. She let a beat of silence stretch, then reached into her bag and placed her phone on the table. Travis frowned. What? She tapped the screen. A recording played. Enjoy your flight, Caldwell. Because one day, you'll walk through an airport just like this one. And there won't be a supervisor to save you. Travis's face went pale. Nia smiled. Now, let me ask you again, officer, who exactly are you? The power shift. For the first time since their encounter began, Travis looked rattled. Nia sat calmly, her phone resting on the cold metal table between them. The audio file still open. His own voice echoed back at him. Enjoy your flight, Caldwell. Because one day, you'll walk through an airport just like this one. And there won't be a supervisor to save you. The words hung heavy in the dimly lit room. Travis's jaw tightened, his posture shifting ever so slightly. He was recalculating. The problem for him. Nia was already 5 steps ahead. She watched him, patient, silent, letting him sweat. Then she spoke, her voice calm, measured, and sharp as a knife. That's a threat, Officer Travis. Travis's nostrils flared, but he didn't respond. You knew exactly what you were saying, she continued, tilting her head. You were trying to intimidate me, trying to make sure I knew that people like you. You think you run the world, that your badge lets you operate however you want, unchecked. She leaned in slightly. But here's the thing. You messed up. His fists clenched. You think one little recording. Nia lifted her phone. Oh, this is nothing. Just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. She tapped the screen. A text popped up. From Reese. Internal Affairs has been building a case on him for a while, but they needed something concrete. Your recording is gold. We're moving in. She turned the screen just enough for Travis to see. And that's when the panic hit him. He masked it quickly, but not quickly enough. Nia saw the slight twitch in his jaw, the tiny shift in his breathing, the way his mind was suddenly racing. Good. Now he knew. Now he understood. This wasn't just about some annoying traveler who had given him attitude. This was about his entire career crumbling beneath him. Nia exhaled, shaking her head. You're sloppy, Travis. You've been sloppy for a long time. The problem is, you finally harassed the wrong person. Silence. Then he moved. Too fast. Too reckless. His hand shot toward the phone. A desperate attempt to erase the evidence, to regain even a shred of control. But Nia was faster. Her hand snapped out, grabbing his wrist midair. She twisted, Hard. Travis grunted in pain, yanking his hand back instinctively. By the time he realized what had happened, Naya was already on her feet. Her stance had shifted, not as a passenger, but as a trained operative. Feet firm, shoulders squared, every muscle ready. Travis saw it, felt it, and for the first time, he hesitated. "You really don't know who you're messing with," Naya said quietly. Her voice wasn't threatening. It wasn't loud, but it was final, and Travis felt every single syllable. He took a slow step back, rolling his wrist, like the pain was nothing. His expression hardened, but he didn't try again. "You think you've won," he muttered. Naya raised an eyebrow. "Oh, I don't think, officer." "I know." She reached down, calmly picking up her phone. Then she stepped around him, walking to the door without looking back. Because she didn't need to. This was over. She had won. And Travis? He was finished. 6. The fall of Raymond Travis. The next morning, it was all over the news. JFK officer Raymond Travis under investigation for harassment, misconduct, and civil rights violations. Sources confirm FBI involvement in case against suspended airport officer. Whistleblower recording leads to federal inquiry into police corruption. Naya sipped her coffee as she watched the headlines roll in. Her flight to D.C. had been rescheduled. She had landed without further issue. And now, she was watching a bad man lose everything. Travis had been placed on immediate leave pending investigation. Internal Affairs was digging into every case he had ever touched. And best of all, more people had come forward. Passengers, former colleagues, even a few cops who had kept quiet for years. They were all finally speaking up. Because that's how it always happened. Bullies only thrived as long as people stayed silent. And Naya Caldwell, she was never silent. Her phone buzzed. "FROM. Reese. Travis is done. Formal charges are incoming. Also, IA found something deeper. He was covering for someone. There's more here. Call me when you land." Naya smirked. Oh, so this rabbit hole went deeper. She took one last sip of coffee, then grabbed her bag. Fine. She wasn't done either. Not yet. The unseen enemy won. A storm beneath the surface. Naya Caldwell had taken down corrupt cops before. She had exposed corporate fraud, infiltrated organized crime rings, and brought entire networks of criminals to their knees. But something about this case, about Travis, felt different. Bigger. Darker. She could feel it in her gut. So as she stepped off the plane at Ronald Reagan International Airport in Washington, D.C., she didn't head straight for her FBI debriefing. She called Reese. "Tell me what you found." The senior agent wasted no time. Travis wasn't just a bad cop, Naya. He was a gatekeeper. Naya's pace slowed as she reached the airport's exit. Gatekeeper for what? A pause. Then, 4 people who weren't supposed to get through. She stopped walking. The streetlights buzzed overhead. Travelers moved past her, unaware that she was standing at the edge of something far bigger than one dirty officer. Travis wasn't working alone. And whoever he had been protecting, they were still out there. Naya exhaled sharply. "What do we have?" "Not enough yet," Reese admitted. "But we do have patterns." Travis wasn't just profiling random passengers. He was targeting specific people. Most of them weren't criminals, just travelers who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Naya frowned. "So what's the connection?" "We're working on it, but here's what's interesting." Reese hesitated. Travis had a second phone. Naya felt her pulse quicken. There it is. The key. A second phone meant secret conversations, unlogged calls, a private line he didn't want on record. Which meant he was reporting to someone. "Where is it now?" Naya asked. "Evidence lockup. They're decrypting it as we speak." "But Naya," Reese's tone grew serious. "Travis had protection. That's why he got away with his abuses for so long. Someone powerful kept him safe. A slow chill spread through Nia's spine. Because if Travis had been protected, and he was the one protecting someone else, then this wasn't just a case of police misconduct. This was a conspiracy. 2. Ghosts in the data. The FBI debrief was routine on paper, a closed-room briefing with a panel of analysts, a review of her interactions with Travis, a report on the legal proceedings already in motion. But the real meeting happened after. In a classified back office, behind 3 layers of clearance, Nia sat across from Reese and Agent Daniel Park, her longtime colleague, as they examined what Travis left behind. His phone. It had taken the Bureau's cyber team hours to crack the encryption. But what they found, it changed everything. Park turned his laptop toward her. Take a look. Nia leaned forward. The screen displayed a series of text messages. Unknown number. Flight 837. Stop her before departure. Do not detain past 30 minutes. Travis. Confirmed. Nia's jaw clenched. That's me. Reese nodded grimly. Someone specifically ordered Travis to stop you at JFK, but not to arrest you. Just to delay you. Nia's mind raced. Why? Who needed her delayed? And more importantly, what was happening during those 30 minutes? Her stomach turned. That wasn't a random stop. Someone had wanted her stuck at JFK while something else happened. She exhaled. Is that the only message? Park shook his head. Not even close. He clicked to the next one. Unknown number. Flight 427. Secondary search required. Bag flagged. Travis. Done. Then another. Unknown number. Flight 1129. Profile match. Escort to holding. Ensure no further travel. Nia's fingers tightened into a fist. This was organized. Travis wasn't just a bully with a badge. He was executing orders. Orders from someone higher up. Reese's voice was low. We ran the burner number. It's a dead end. No traceable records, no name attached. But here's the problem. She clicked another file. This time, it was bank statements. Money. Lots of it. Travis had been receiving regular deposits into an unregistered offshore account. Bribes. Nia felt her pulse thud in her ears. Who was paying him? We don't know yet, Park admitted. But whoever it was, they paid him to control who got through airport security and who didn't. A slow, creeping realization settled over Nia. This wasn't about Travis. This was bigger. Someone, some organization, was using airport security for something far more sinister. Travis had just been the pawn. The real players. They were still in the shadows. And now, they knew Nia was looking. 3. The warning. Nia didn't sleep that night. Her mind was too sharp, too full of unanswered questions, too wired from the revelations. Travis had been neutralized. He was under investigation, his dirty money being tracked, his entire history being ripped apart by internal affairs. But that wasn't enough. Because whoever he had been working for, they were still watching. Her phone buzzed at 3:42 a.m. She didn't recognize the number, but she answered anyway. No one spoke. Silence. Then, a single, quiet breath on the other end. And then, a click. The call ended. Nia stared at the screen. No voicemail. No trace. But the message was clear. They knew. She had rattled something she wasn't supposed to find. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled just as carefully. Fine. Let them watch. Because now, she was watching them too. And when she found them, she wouldn't just delay their flight. She'd bring their entire operation crashing down. The final confrontation. 1. The meeting that wasn't meant to happen. Nia Caldwell had spent her career hunting criminals. But this time, they were hunting her too. She had rattled something big, bigger than one dirty cop, bigger than airport security corruption. A machine. And machines didn't like being exposed. So when she received the text message the next morning, she wasn't surprised. Unknown number. We need to talk. Alone. Unknown number. 10 a.m. The old courtyard. Adams Morgan. No backup. Nia smirked. No backup. Cute. She was already on her way. 2. Face to face with the ghosts. The old courtyard was quiet, tucked between rows of old brownstones and a rundown coffee shop that smelled like burned espresso. Nia arrived early, slipping into the space like a shadow. She wasn't reckless. She had people watching. Reese was 3 blocks away. Park had eyes on the street cameras. She wasn't walking in blind. She was walking in prepared. And then he arrived. A man in his mid-50s. Tall. Well-dressed. A government face. Not a thug. Not a cartel member. This was someone deep inside the system. Someone with real power. Nia folded her arms. You wanted to talk. The man smiled. I wanted to offer you a deal. 3. The offer she didn't take. You've been poking around places you don't belong, he said, voice calm. And you're making people nervous. Nia shrugged. That's kind of my job. The man smiled. Your job is to know when to stop. She tilted her head. Funny. I didn't see that in my job description. A pause. Then, he pulled out a folder. He placed it on the table between them. Inside this, he said, is everything we know about you. Every mission. Every cover identity. Every weak spot. Nia didn't blink. You think you scare me? She asked, voice cool. The man leaned in. I think you're smart enough to walk away. He slid the folder toward her. Take the deal, he murmured. Forget about Travis. Forget about the operation. Walk away. Nia stared at the folder. Then she looked up and laughed. 4. The moment everything changed. The man's face hardened. You think this is funny? Nia leaned back, arms crossed. I think you just made a mistake. He frowned. How so? She smirked. You just admitted there's something to walk away from. The man's jaw tightened. Too late. She had him. Here's how this is going to go, Nia said smoothly. You're going to leave. And when you do, my team is going to rip your operation apart piece by piece. We'll find every dirty cop, every bribe, every illegal act tied to your network. She smiled. And then I'm going to personally make sure you never work in this town again. The man's face was unreadable. Then, he sighed. Shame, he murmured. I really thought you were smarter than this. And then, he stood up and walked away. 5. The fall of the machine. 2 weeks later, it was all over the news. FBI uncovers widespread corruption in airport security operations. Millions funneled through illegal immigration and blacklist schemes. Government officials implicated in high-level smuggling ring. Travis. Gone. Fired. Facing federal charges. His contacts. Exposed. The operation he was part of. Dismantled. And the man from the meeting. Vanished. No name. No trace. But Nia knew he was still out there. Watching. Waiting. But so was she. And next time, she'd be waiting too. Epilogue. The next flight. 1 month later, Nia walked through Dulles International Airport, her bag slung over her shoulder. This time, she wasn't undercover. She wasn't hunting. She was just passing through. But as she approached security, she saw something that made her stop. A black mother and her teenage son standing in line. A security officer, a younger man, not unlike Travis, was speaking to them. His posture was stiff, his stance too aggressive. The boy looked nervous. The mother looked exhausted. And Nia recognized the moment immediately. She stepped forward, cleared her throat. The officer turned. Nia smiled. Is there a problem here, officer? A flicker of recognition crossed his face. He had seen the news. He knew exactly who she was. He cleared his throat, stepping back. "No, ma'am. No problem at all." Nia watched as the mother and son moved through without issue. Then she picked up her bag, rolled her shoulders, and walked toward her gate. Because now, they knew. They knew she was watching, and they'd never forget it.